A ranger and her horse vanished during a routine patrol in Yosemite. 5 years later, geology students accidentally found the horse buried 4 feet underground in a ravine miles from any trail. The discovery answered one question, but opened up something far more sinister. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, if someone you loved disappeared without a trace, how long would you keep searching? Because what this father did for 5 years will absolutely blow your mind. It was late September 2003, and the static crackling from the dispatch radio at Yosemite National Park headquarters wasn't unusual. That's just what happens when you're trying to communicate across granite walls and dense pine forests. But the silence that followed the static was deeply wrong. Rick Sandoval, the dispatcher on duty, leaned closer to his console. He'd been running through the end-of-shift check-ins, a routine thing where every ranger reports in. Every ranger had checked in, their voices clear or faint, depending on where they were in the sprawling wilderness. Every ranger except one. He keyed the microphone again. Dispatch to Ranger 3 David. Radio check. Over. More silence. Not even the telltale click of someone keying their mic in response. Ranger Anna Lockhart, call sign 3 David, was one of the most dependable people on the force. At 29, she had a quiet competence that commanded respect. She was never late, never sloppy. A missed check-in was so out of character that it immediately set off alarm bells. When his second and third calls went unanswered, that low hum of anxiety escalated to something sharper. Anna was on patrol in a quiet northern sector of the park, a network of trails less frequented by tourists. She was on horseback, riding Orion, her steady and trusted chestnut partner for the last 4 years. Here's the thing about rangers and their horses. They're a single, highly capable unit. For both to vanish without a trace wasn't just improbable, it was nearly impossible. Before the first search team had even gathered their gear, the front door of headquarters swung open. It was David Lockhart, Anna's father. In his late 50s, with the weathered face and steady gaze of a man who'd spent a lifetime reading the landscape, David was a legend in the park. He'd retired from this very ranger station just 2 years before. He didn't need a call from dispatch to know something was wrong. He felt it. His voice was low and steady, but it carried an undeniable urgency. He looked at the map, his finger tracing paths Anna knew well. This wasn't a broken radio or a simple delay. Anna was in trouble. As full darkness consumed Yosemite Valley, the first search teams deployed. Headlamps cut sharp, lonely beams through the immense blackness of the forest. Rangers on foot and horseback moved out, their calls for Anna echoing off the silent granite walls. They focused on the primary trails, the logical places to start. They checked river, banks and meadow edges, but the park offered no clues. No tracks veering off the path, no spooked horse, no discarded equipment. It was as if Ranger Anna Lockhart and her horse Orion had ridden into the wilderness and simply been erased from the earth. In those first frantic days, hope was still alive, but the wilderness remained stubbornly silent. Then on the third day, something happened that changed everything. A pair of hikers, visibly shaken, reported a harrowing encounter. They'd been on a trail in a rugged, heavily forested basin several miles east of Anna's designated patrol route when they were charged by a large, aggressive black bear. They described its behavior as predatory and unnatural, forcing them to scramble up a rock face to escape. The report was electric. It was specific, credible, and provided a chillingly plausible explanation for what might have happened. A quiet disappearance was now potentially a violent wildlife attack. This new theory reshaped the entire operation. The search grid was immediately and drastically shifted. The park's wildlife biologists confirmed that while rare, such unprovoked attacks weren't unheard of. The focus moved from Anna's intended path to the vast, unforgiving terrain of the bear's territory. For weeks, this became the single-minded obsession. Teams of trackers, some of the best in the state, were brought in. They scoured dense thickets and steep canyons looking for any sign. A helicopter buzzed overhead with thermal imaging cameras, but the aggressive bear was never located, and the search area yielded nothing. The lead that had burned so brightly led them into a dead end, consuming precious time and resources. As autumn turned to winter, the official search was formally scaled back. The case was reclassified from an active search to an open investigation, a bureaucratic term for a mystery left to fester. For the National Park Service, it was a tragic but closed chapter. For David Lockhart, it was the beginning of a long, solitary vigil. He refused to let his daughter's memory be archived in a dusty file cabinet. His small home just outside the park boundaries transformed into a private command center. The walls of his study, once covered with family photos, were now dominated by topographic maps pinned side by side, creating a massive, sprawling chart of Yosemite's northern half. For the next 5 years, David's life found a new, somber rhythm. 3 or 4 days a week, he would pack a small rucksack with water, a compass, and a notebook, and drive into the park before dawn. He walked the trails the search teams had abandoned. He bushwhacked through dense undergrowth to follow the ghost of a path he'd seen on a 70-year-old map. He documented everything with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. Rockfalls that could have forced a detour, streams that had changed course, clearings that offered shelter. He filled notebook after notebook with detailed hand-drawn maps. It was a punishing, lonely task, driven by a father's refusal to accept the silence. Now here's where this story takes an unexpected turn. For 5 years, the case existed only in whispers, in the quiet grief of a father, and in cold, inactive files. The wilderness had swallowed Anna whole, and time had hardened the silence around her memory. Then, in the bright, hopeful spring of 2008, a team of university scientists, entirely unaware of the tragedy that haunted these woods, stumbled into the heart of the mystery. Dr. Lena Petrova, a geomorphologist, was leading a small team of graduate students on a research project. Their objective was academic and completely detached from human drama, to study sediment deposition and erosion in Yosemite's lesser-known ravine systems. They were using ground-penetrating radar, a device that looks like a futuristic lawnmower, which they hauled into remote corners of the park. For weeks, their days had been routine, setting up survey grids, dragging the radar in precise lines, analyzing the ghostly layered images on their laptop screen. The ravine they were working in that day was particularly difficult to access. No marked trails led to it. They had to navigate using GPS, scrambling down a steep, scree-covered slope. It was the kind of place you needed a specific reason to visit. As one of her students, a young man named Ben, was making a pass over a relatively flat section at the bottom, he paused. "Hey, Dr. Petrova, you should see this." On the laptop screen, amidst the expected horizontal lines representing layers of silt and clay, there was a large, dense, and distinctly unnatural shape. A dark oblong mass located about 4 feet below the surface. It wasn't layered like sediment, and it didn't have the sharp, irregular signature of a buried boulder. To confirm their findings, they would need to excavate. The next day, after securing the necessary permit, they returned with shovels. The digging was slow and methodical. It was Ben who felt it first. His shovel struck something that made a dull, hollow thunk. He dropped to his knees and began clearing dirt away with his hands. What emerged wasn't stone or clay. It was a curved, off-white shape. He brushed away more dirt, revealing a series of parallel, slender bones. "Lena," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a rib cage." The academic excitement evaporated, replaced by cold dread. Over the next hour, they slowly uncovered a complete, fully articulated skeleton of a large animal lying on its side, as if it had been gently laid to rest. As they cleared dirt from around the legs, they found something else. Two rusty U-shaped pieces of iron positioned right where the front hooves would have been. Horseshoes. Dr. Petrova stood back, her mind racing. An entire horse, buried 4 feet deep in a ravine miles from any official trail. This was no accident of nature. An animal that died on the surface would be scattered by scavengers. This horse had been deliberately and carefully buried. Within 2 hours, senior rangers had arrived at the scene. They took one look at the carefully excavated pit and the perfectly laid out skeleton, and their faces hardened. The discovery sent a shockwave through the park's long-serving staff. The memory of Anna Lockhart and her missing horse Orion was a deep scar. A park farrier, a grizzled man who'd been shoeing Yosemite's horses for 30 years, was brought to the site. He knelt by the pit, examining the rusty horseshoes. Even through the corrosion, he recognized his own handiwork. He pointed to a small, barely visible notch he hammered into the outer edge of every shoe he fitted, a unique personal mark. The confirmation was absolute and chilling. The skeleton belonged to Orion. The 5-year-old cold case was instantly, violently reopened. The discovery answered one question, but posed a dozen more terrifying ones. They'd found her horse, but where was Anna? The careful burial ruled out the long-held bear attack theory and pointed squarely at human intervention. But why bury the horse and not the rider? The FBI was notified, and a new lead investigator was assigned, a sharp, tenacious cold case detective named Iris Zola. Her first order of business was to treat the entire ravine as a major crime scene. The discovery transformed the case from a cold file into a live, high-priority investigation. At the center of this new storm was Detective Zola, brought in from the state's cold case unit for her sharp, analytical mind. Her first official meeting was with David Lockhart. She expected to meet a man worn down by years of unanswered questions. Instead, the man who walked in was anything but broken. He carried a heavy canvas bag over his shoulder. Without a word, he walked to the largest table and unrolled its contents. It wasn't one map, but dozens taped together to form a massive, intricate tapestry of the park's northern wilderness. It was staggering. Official park trails were marked in black ink, but they were outnumbered by a web of fine-colored lines David had drawn himself. Red for forgotten miners' tracks from the 1800s, blue for seasonal creek beds, green for game trails. The map was covered in tiny, meticulous annotations. Rock slide here, fall 04, overhang cave, potential shelter. It was a 5-year diary of grief, hope, and relentless exploration. David pointed to a spot on the map with a steady finger. This is the ravine where you found him. Then he traced a faint green line running along the ridge directly above it. This is an old game trail. It's not on any of your maps. It's the fastest way to cross this ridge if you're on foot and know the land. Anna knew it. We walked it together when she was a teenager. He was providing what the original search had so desperately lacked, a focused, logical starting point. While new search teams were being organized, another quieter investigation was unfolding. Under a forensic tent near the ravine, a team led by Dr. Alistair Finch, a veteran forensic anthropologist, was examining Orion's skeleton. The initial findings were deeply perplexing. There were no signs of predation, no teeth marks, no cut marks suggesting a human had butchered the animal. Most significantly, no massive fractures consistent with a long fall. This horse had not been attacked by wildlife, nor had it tumbled to its death. Frustration was setting in when Dr. Finch focused on the lower bones of the right foreleg. He noted a minor hairline fracture, but as he examined it, he saw something glinting deep within the fissure. A speck of metallic light no bigger than a grain of sand. Using impossibly fine-tipped tweezers, he carefully extracted the fragment. Under the magnifier, it was revealed to be a tiny, sharp-edged shard of dark gray metal. It clearly wasn't lead from a bullet. It was too hard, too brittle. Later that day, Detective Zola stared at the minuscule fragment sealed in an evidence bag. So it's not a bullet. Definitely not, Dr. Finch confirmed. The composition is wrong. It's a fragment, a chip off something larger. It was driven into the bone with significant force. Whatever hit this horse was made of a very hard, very specific type of metal. The discovery was monumental. For 5 years, the case had been devoid of any physical evidence of foul play. Now they had this tiny, baffling piece of metal that proved Orion had been struck. The fragment would have to be sent to a specialized materials lab, one with equipment to analyze its elemental composition. The answer could take months. Detective Zola refused to let the investigation stall. The discovery of Orion's violent death and deliberate burial had rendered the original investigation files almost obsolete. Her team began re-interviewing everyone in Anna's life. The conversations were somber and repetitive. Everyone described the same person, a dedicated, kind, profoundly capable woman with no known enemies. The narrative was so consistently positive it was almost unhelpful. The breakthrough came during a second interview with Miles Corbin, Anna's close friend and fellow ranger. He spoke about her passion for the park. She was a real purist, Miles recalled. She hated seeing the park disrespected. But there was one thing that really truly angered her. The poachers. You mean wildlife poachers? No, Miles clarified. Artifact poachers. Guys who come in with metal detectors and shovels, digging for old bottles, belt buckles, stuff from the gold rush camps. She called them grave robbers of history. In the months before she went missing, she was more fired up about it than ever. She said she was finding more and more dig sites on her patrols, especially in the remote northern sectors. She was convinced someone was running a systematic operation. This detail, which in 2003 had sounded like a simple workplace grievance, now landed with force. A violent confrontation, a buried horse, an illegal digging operation in a remote area. For the first time, a plausible motive began to take shape. Acting on this thread, Detective Zola dispatched detectives to pull every patrol log and citation issued by Anna for the 12 months before her disappearance. They spent days sifting through stacks of paper. Then they found it. A name. Kieran Briggs. He appeared twice. The first citation from May 2003 for using a metal detector in a restricted historical zone. The location was within the same network of ravines where Orion's body had been found. The second citation from July 2003 was more serious. Illegal excavation. Anna had caught him with a shovel and bucket, having dug a 3-foot hole. According to her report, Briggs had been belligerent and argumentative. Anna had confiscated his shovel and issued a hefty fine. The name immediately sent detectives scrambling. Kieran Briggs had been on the initial list of people to interview in 2003. A note said he claimed he was at a dental appointment in Fresno on the day Anna disappeared. A cursory check at the time seemed to confirm it. But with new context, a weak alibi that was once good enough to dismiss a minor person of interest now looked like a potential crack in a carefully constructed lie. Kieran Briggs was described in public records as a part-time handyman and amateur historian. He ran a small antique shop specializing in Gold Rush-era memorabilia. He was a solitary figure, respected by some for his historical knowledge, regarded by others as an obsessive crank. The call that changed everything came on a gray Tuesday morning in February 2009. The voice belonged to a materials scientist from the State Forensics Lab. "Detective Zola, we have the results on your fragment. This is fascinating." He explained they'd used a scanning electron microscope. It's not steel, not iron, not lead. It's a tungsten carbide alloy, a very specific one. Zola felt a jolt of electricity. What does that mean in plain English? It means it's from the tip of a geological rock hammer. This particular alloy is incredibly hard, but also brittle. It's designed to chip away at hard rock like granite without dulling. When it strikes something with enough force, especially bone, it doesn't bend. It microfractures. A tiny piece can shear right off. This specific alloy was favored in a handful of high-end brands used by serious geologists, prospectors, and rock hounds. It was a specialist's instrument. After hanging up, Zola walked to the whiteboard. Next to Kieran Briggs's photo, she wrote in large block letters, "Rock Hammer." All the pieces suddenly snapped into a single horrifying image. Anna confronting Briggs in the ravine. Briggs, the amateur prospector, holding the tool of his trade. A moment of panic. A violent swing. The lab result was the linchpin. It transformed the theory of a confrontation over artifact poaching into near certainty. Zola had enough to convince a judge her case was worthy of a search warrant. The raid was executed at dawn. A convoy of unmarked cars rolled into the quiet street where Briggs lived. Zola led a team to a detached garage that served as his workshop. The air inside was thick with the smell of old metal, wood polish, and damp earth. It was a hoarder's paradise. Shelves overflowed with dusty bottles, rusted tools, and carefully labeled boxes. They were looking for one specific item, a rock hammer, possibly with a damaged tip. They scoured the workshop, but after 2 hours, they hadn't found it. Just as the search was winding down, a specialist from the National Park Service called Zola over to flat file drawers. "Detective, you need to see this." He'd opened a drawer to reveal dozens of artifacts, each nestled in its own foam cutout and meticulously labeled. He pointed to square-headed iron nails. "These are from the 1850s. They were only used at the old Pinyon Creek logging camp. And this ceramic shard, we found other pieces, but only at one site." "Where is that site?" The historian looked up, his expression grim. "It's a small, historically significant minor settlement from 1852. Its location is deep inside the same ravine system where you found the horse." It was checkmate. They hadn't found the murder weapon, but they'd found something just as damning. His collection was a detailed catalog of his crimes, proving he'd been there, proving he was lying. "We have enough," Zola said. "Bring him in." Kieran Briggs was brought to the command post. He walked in with an air of aggrieved indignation, a man bothered by a bureaucratic mistake. He maintained his composure as Zola began the interview, recounting the same alibi he'd given 5 years earlier. "I was in Fresno that day. I had a root canal." "We did check, Kieran," Zola replied calmly. "You had an appointment?" "That's true, but you canceled it that morning. The dental office records are very clear, so I'll ask you again. Where were you on September 23rd, 2003? A flicker of panic appeared in his eyes. The foundation of his 5-year-old lie had just crumbled. Zola slid photographs across the table, images of the artifacts from his workshop. "These were found this morning," she said. "Our expert has identified them. They come from a single protected site, deep in the ravine where we found Anna's horse." Briggs stared at the photos, his face paling. Then Zola pushed the final piece across, a magnified image of the tiny tungsten carbide fragment. "And then there's this. Our lab found it embedded in the horse's leg bone. It's a chip from the tip of a geological rock hammer, the kind a man who digs for artifacts might carry." The fight went out of him. It was as if a string had been cut. His shoulders slumped. When he finally spoke, his voice was a broken whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen." The confession tumbled out, a torrent of words held back for half a decade. He explained he was in the ravine that day, digging at his secret spot. He'd just unearthed a rare, intact bottle when he heard a horse. Looked up to see Anna on Orion standing on the ridge above, looking down. She dismounted and made her way into the ravine. She knew who I was, Briggs recounted. She recognized me from the last time. She told me I was done, that this time she was taking me in for a federal felony. The words sent panic through him. He saw his entire world imploding. His collection would be confiscated. He'd go to prison. He begged her to just let him go. But Anna was resolute. She reached for her radio. I just lost it, Briggs whispered. My hammer was in my hand. I didn't even think. I just swung. He described the sickening thud as the hammer struck her head. She collapsed without a sound. The horse became frantic. In his frenzy, terrified the noise would attract attention, he lunged at the animal, swinging wildly to silence it. The second part of his confession was even more chilling. The violence was over, and a different part of his mind took control. The meticulous planner. He spent hours digging deeper, eventually rolling the massive animal in and burying it. But Anna was different. He was determined she would never be found. He spoke of a place he'd found years earlier, a deep vertical cave, a narrow fissure in a rock face, hidden behind dense brush. It was a perfect hiding place. He described carrying her body, a grueling journey of several miles through dark woods. He pushed her into the fissure, listening as her body tumbled into blackness. When he finished, a profound quiet settled over the room. The 5-year mystery was solved. There was no complex conspiracy, only a pathetic, obsessive man, a moment of panicked violence, and a desperate, chillingly effective cover-up. The journey to Anna's final resting place was a somber, silent procession. Kieran Briggs, now shackled, led the way. Behind him walked Detective Zola and David Lockhart. David had insisted on being there. After 5 years of searching alone, he would not let his daughter be brought out without him. A specialized rescue team followed with heavy bags of equipment. After nearly an hour of grueling hiking, Briggs stopped, pointing toward a wall of granite almost completely obscured by tangled brush. "It's in there," he mumbled. Behind the brush. It was not a cave in the traditional sense, but a deep vertical fissure in the rock. The rescue team went to work, clearing brush and setting up anchors. The lead rescuer, a man named Gavin, checked his harness and headlamp before being lowered into the fissure. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then Gavin's voice crackled over the radio, calm but heavy. "I have contact. I have visual confirmation of human remains." David Lockhart stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the black opening. The recovery was slow and delicate. Finally, the signal was given, and they hauled the line, bringing their fallen colleague home. As the recovery bag was gently laid on a tarp, a heavy silence settled over the clearing. The on-site coroner began his preliminary examination. He noted the tattered remains of Anna's ranger uniform, pinned to the fabric over her chest, tarnished but intact, was her ranger badge. David closed his eyes for a long moment. Even in this dark place, she was still a ranger. Then the coroner found something else. Tucked into a small pocket of her patrol trousers was a small weathered leather pouch. Zola carefully took it and looked at Miles Corbin, who'd been asked to help with identification. His face was pale, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Miles, do you recognize this?" He nodded slowly. It was hers. She made it herself. She was always collecting things. With trembling fingers, he loosened the drawstring. A small collection of dried seeds and thistle heads spilled into his palm. "What are they?" "Invasive species," Miles explained. "Italian thistle, yellow star thistle." Anna was on a one-woman crusade to map and remove invasive plants from the park's native meadows. She would collect the seeds whenever she found a new patch so she could log the location and report it for removal. The discovery hung in the air, more profound than any piece of evidence. This small pouch of seeds was a testament not to how Anna died, but to how she lived. On her final day, in her final hours, she'd been doing her job, protecting her park right down to its smallest flower, her purpose unwavering until the very last moment. Kieran Briggs was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. His collection of stolen artifacts was turned over to the National Park Service. In the years that followed, David Lockhart did not let grief be his only legacy. He began volunteering for the Park Service, sharing stories of the gold rush miners, the park's early days, and of a dedicated ranger who knew the wilderness so intimately that she noticed even the smallest, most unwelcome seeds, and who gave her life, protecting the place she loved. So here's my question for you. If someone you loved disappeared without a trace, how many years would you dedicate to finding them? Would you be able to walk those trails alone, day after day, holding on to hope? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. And if this story showed you what true dedication looks like, both from a father who never gave up and a ranger who loved her park to the very end, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. There are more incredible true stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.